Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Rafasi and I'm coming to you from 8 Wing CFB Trenton. Today I'm on the line for this presentation with my colleague Cindy Tromp, and she'll be managing any questions that you may have through the chat. And I will be delivering the presentation in front of you, the PowerPoint grid that you see. We will advance to those slides at any given time. Please feel free to take notes, maybe self-reflect on some of the questions that we ask. And if you have any questions for us following presentations that you may watch, please feel free to contact us at +healthpromotion@cfbtrenton.com. So without further ado, we're going to get started with this particular serial called Frustrated with COVID-19, and it's from our social wellness portfolio entitled Managing Angry Moments. I'm going to revert now to the slide deck. Okay, so today, as mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit from the social wellness portfolio, and you'll notice on the slide, this is an opportunity for us to just make sure that our audience is aware of who we are and what we do. So today, the Managing Angry Moments portfolio from the Strength and Strengthening the Forces folder we have 4 different topics or content areas: nutritional wellness, social wellness, addictions, injury prevention, and active living. So please, at any time, avail yourself of the online virtual webinars that Health Promotion Canada-wide offers, but certainly who Mike Taylor has set up for you through our Project Europe, we will be delivering monthly. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about anger. We're going to look at knowledge and understanding around that topic, and we're going to hopefully learn and practice some skills. For some of you, it might be a reminder of things that you already know, and maybe what better time than now is to apply some of these concerns that you may have with this emotion, but also some of the skills that you may have forgotten about or you don't use as often. And hopefully during this time that we're all going through, what better time than now to sort of remind ourselves of the tools and resources available to us. So for discussion today, we're going to talk about the word anger, aggression, assertiveness. We're going to talk about the positives and the negative aspects of anger and the impact that it could have on your health. We're also going to talk about one tool in particular, but I'm going to give you a list of a whole bunch of other things for consideration. And I encourage you at the end of this to make sure you can source out a guided meditation that perhaps you give it a go for, say, 5 to 7 days, where you just try a meditation for the purpose of making sure you have that one tool in your toolbox. So we're going to talk about anger. And I want you to take a moment to reflect on what you think it's all about. The next slide is going to give you an opportunity to not only think about what anger is all about, but once you have an idea of what anger is for you, what does anger management look like? So if, for example, anger, if you think of something that would describe that word to you, what might that look like? Is it, like the slide presents, a fist going into a flat hand? Or in fact, when you get angry, are you so full of tools and resources that you use it as an opportunity not only to challenge a situation, but to come up with a solution? So an opportunity right now to just reflect on what you think of when you think of anger. And the takeaway message for perhaps what we would call a working definition of anger is to recognize that it is normal. People are going to have anger in their lives, and today we're gonna take a look at some of the ways that might be useful to us. So what is anger, or another word for it? So maybe just jot down on a piece of paper or reflect on when you think of what anger is, what would you use as another word to describe it? And feel free, for those of you who are watching it live, feel free to write that in the chat room for discussion. I'd also like you to think of what frustration is in a word, another word for frustration. So first, anger, And what would be another word that you would use to describe anger? And then the second part is, what is frustration? And another word for it. And as mentioned, for those watching live, feel free to use the chat. So anger, another word for it. Some people might come up with an emotion, an outburst, an uncomfortable feeling. Maybe another way of describing it is the inability to cope. Some people might even look at anger as something someone else causes them. And that's going to be one of the myths that we debunk today, is that anger is not real. Now, frustration, think about that, and maybe even go so far as to think about some of the things that make you, cause you, lead you to feel frustrated. And under the circumstances that we're all living through today, and for the purpose of today's presentation, we're definitely going to reflect on COVID-19 and the pandemic that we are all living through, and how that situation, in fact, could be leading us to feel angry, or presenting an opportunity for us to experience this emotion of anger. And we could be very frustrated with the situation. For some of you, you're posted overseas. What an opportunity for you to be living in another country and experiencing other cultures and working with new colleagues. And this situation now has presented a bit of a barrier to what otherwise you may have been expecting. So we're going to weigh all of that as it relates to how we can control some of the things that may lead us to have angry feelings, angry emotions. Okay, the next slide is just going to, by definition, talk to us about what anger is. It's a strong emotion. It's an emotional state that varies in intensity, duration, and frequency. Some people are really good at having that emotional response and then putting it to rest, or moving it away, or shifting gears, changing perspective. And others, we could have it vary, as the slide suggests, in intensity, duration, and frequency, and it could stick with us. We could have a whole day where we were just angry. We could have a whole conversation where somebody actually says to you, you're really angry still. And it has this ability to have a different duration or frequency depending on the person, depending on the situation. Really important on this slide is the piece that says it's natural and it's normal, and it signals that there's a problem we have to solve. So if we look at the situation right now, we have a global pandemic. If that is one of the things that is making us angry or frustrated, the reality is that is a normal reaction, and it is reminding us that there's some things that we're going to have to solve. Some of it might be how we think about it. Some of it might be the behavior that we are using towards it, or the things that we do about it. But the bottom line, this slide reminds us that it is natural. So we should take some peace in knowing that. This slide is just a quote. You don't drown by falling in the water, you drown by actually staying there. So we want people to recognize the importance of not staying angry, not staying in that spot. We've all fallen into this situation right now. We're all experiencing probably some strong emotions, but what we're hoping is that we can get away from that and find some tools and resources to help us cope with that. So this next slide reminds us that there are many different signals that you can take stock of when you are angry. So, for example, how do you know you're angry? Physical signs, right away, some people may say, I get red face, I can feel my heart rate increase, my blood pressure goes up. Emotional signs, you might have a certain sensation or feeling. Behavioral signs, you may actually do something that reminds you you're angry. And cognitive, those are about the thoughts that we have. So for some people, it's an immediate physical response. We know, oh man, I must be angry. Look at how I'm reacting physically. But there are lots of signals that can trigger us to notice what we're going through. And if we apply this to the current situation and COVID-19, so for example, cognitive, what are we thinking about? What are we worried about? How is this situation reminding us that we know we're experiencing some anger? Behaviorally, what are the things that we're doing that reminds us that we know we're angry about something? Physically, how do we feel? Is our blood pressure okay? Is our heart rate elevated? Are we having circulation issues? Are our muscles tense all the time? And emotionally, what are we sensing, emotionally feeling? So important for you to reflect on that, because understanding that you are having this emotional state of anger is half of the battle. If you recognize it, then you can do something about it. If you're not recognizing it, then unfortunately you're not going to apply the necessary tools to get you through it. This slide reminds us that when we go through anger, there's many stages to that and to the thoughts associated with it. Something happens that triggers this emotional state, and then if we don't action it and we don't deal with it, or we don't recognize it's happening, this emotional state tends to escalate, and then we get into a bit of a crisis phase. And that crisis phase is when we lose all ability to make sound decisions and to treat people respectfully. And the blinders go on, and unfortunately, we start to worry only about our own self-preservation. Anger Mountain's important as a visual to recognize that the minute we know we are having a response to a situation, that this is where we want to apply some coping strategies, some resources. So that is more of a visual for you moving forward to recognizing the anger mountain and the various stages. Obviously, once we get to 4 and 5, the crisis is somewhat over. However, the damage now probably has to be repaired. So recognizing the impact that anger and the mountain of these stages that you might be working through as it happens. So we're going to look at some important definitions, because I've already been interchanging a few words. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page with regards to those words. So the first one, what is aggression? So think for a second of what you feel aggression is. Somebody who's aggressive or an aggressor. I think of a soccer field, and I think of how for so many years I heard coaches say, come on team, be aggressive. And that's not really what we want in an athletic sporting setting. We don't want people to actually be aggressive. We don't want people to harm each other. We want people to be athletic and skilled and on their game, but that word in the world of sports, maybe not the word we're going for. So when you look to this next slide, aggression by definition is behavior with intent to do harm to a living being, whether harm results or not, or it's a behavior with willful blindness as to whether harm would result. So if you in fact go back to that example I presented of the soccer field, and you can hear that coach saying, come on team, be aggressive. Now you're recognizing that maybe some of these words, we don't even understand how we use them and how we interchange them. We're not aspiring to achieve aggression. Aggression, by definition, is about harm and disrespect. And we want to make sure that we recognize that there's another word that we're going for, and it's not aggression. So if we look at the differences between anger and aggression, anger, we have this emotional response. Aggression, we actually do something. We have a behavior that results. So anger is an emotion, and aggression is a behavior. So what we want to be mindful of is it's a natural state to have this angry emotion, but it's not so natural or functional to be aggressive when we have anger. Next one is about passive behavior. And when we talk about that word passive, we usually use the synonym doormat. So we want to make sure that we recognize that somebody having a passive behavior allows others to take control or allows a situation to take control. And then ultimately your rights get violated. And you might even end up feeling like you're bullied. So the doormat response. Also not something that we're going for when we're looking at the benefits of emotions and how we can control them. Because there are going to be some benefits to having a reaction to uncomfortable situations. What we're really trying to achieve or aspire to achieve is the assertive behavior. So we have anger, we have aggression, we have passive, and now we have assertive. So this one would move right to the top as far as importance. Being assertive is stating what your experience is of the situation, so acknowledging it, what you want, and it's in a way that is respectful of others. So you're focusing on problem solving or resolving conflict. You're respecting self and others, and you're intending to do no harm. So back to the soccer pitch. Would a coach say, come on team, be assertive? They might. Be respectful, get what you want. Maybe you want to advance down the field. Maybe you want to score a goal. Maybe you want to win this tournament. But it's not about disrespect, and it's not about the intention of doing harm. Okay, so the next slide. What makes you mad? This is an opportunity now just to reflect on that. So recognizing that if you take a look at your inventory of things that in fact cause you to feel, other word, mad, same potentially as angry, but recognizing that for you. Why do we get angry? Usually this emotion happens as a result of something. Maybe there's a perceived threat to people, things, or ideas that are important. Maybe there's some unmet expectations or a perceived injustice. Maybe there's frustration of our goals. Perhaps you feel hurt, embarrassed, humiliated. Maybe somebody has harassed you. Maybe there's a personal attack. Traumatic events, high stress levels. Maybe it is, in fact, a global pandemic. And this Aristotle quotation, really poignant. Anyone can become angry, that's easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose in the right way, that's not easy. So when do you think angry or being angry is healthy? When would there be an example of a constructive function of anger? So if you wouldn't mind taking a second to reflect on that. So when would anger be healthy? And what are some of the constructive functions of anger? So maybe you could think for think of an example, and feel free to post that in the chat if you'd like. But perhaps you can think of an example of when anger is healthy. Has there ever been a time where you became angry as a result of a situation and something positive came out of that? Just allow you for some time to reflect on that. So this slide reminds us that there's some valuable signals of, it'll give you valuable signals of unmet needs, some other constructive functions. It could activate a psychological resource. Maybe it'll help protect your self-esteem. So maybe somebody has been harassing or bullying you and you get angry in a way that you react to take some control back and maybe do something about that situation. You might use that function of anger to create some energy to resolve some conflict, to accomplish a task, even if it's right or wrong. So recognizing that there are constructive functions of anger. One of the biggest examples that we see, especially this time of year, is the MAD campaign that we put on around the hosting season. And MAD campaign, the acronym stands for Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. So it became a constructive function of angry people that needed to make some positive change with a harm reduction campaign all around addictions and driving. So there would be a great example of the constructive function of anger. You can probably think of examples in your life where you have used anger to accomplish something meaningful or positive as a result of something very frustrating. So when does anger become unhealthy or harmful? And now we look at the destructive functions of anger. So we need to recognize that it's a natural state that we all potentially experience. And sometimes we have positive outcomes as a result of it, but other times we have very negative outcomes. And some of those examples would be when it triggers aggressive behavior. Maybe you're ruminating all the time. You may experience other distressful emotions. It may damage important relationships. It could impair your performance and your efficiency at high levels. It could lead to a loss of respect of others or your own self-respect. It could compromise your physical and mental health. That's really important because in health promotion, we're always being cognizant of the impacts on our overall wellness. And then the last slide point talks about when it carries a risk of serious or negative outcomes. So we know that there are lots of examples out there of people who have had very negative outcomes from or as a result of an angry situation. So we need to, more than anything, just remind ourselves that we are focusing on not so much this word aggression or assertion, and not so much the destructive function as working towards finding a constructive function of anger. So it does become a problem when it's our main response to certain situations, and sometimes maybe certain people. Maybe with certain people, your only go-to emotion is anger. So that might be an area to pay some attention to. It becomes a problem if it lasts too long, if it's too intense, if it occurs in inappropriate situations, if it has a negative impact on your relationships, if it can lead to aggression because now there's harm and disrespect happening, and if you hold it all in. We know, again, the impact of anger on our mental and physical health is pretty profound. So we want to make sure we recognize that holding it in is not a good thing. So what is the impact of chronic anger? It'll impair your immune system. It'll increase your levels of cholesterol. It could increase the intensity of chronic pain you experience. You could have an increased risk of and death from cardiovascular disease, an increased risk for anxiety and depression. And there's a graphic on the slide that says anger is only one letter short of danger. And that's the message, that if we hang on to anger, maybe we've had a falling out with somebody or something's happened in the workplace, or maybe it's more profound like this pandemic we're all living through. And if we carry this anger with us day in, day out, it's going to have a double whammy impact on our overall health. So being mindful of that. This slide reminds us of how that mental fitness piece intersects this topic of managing anger. So when we look at the definition for mental fitness, it reminds us that that's about being psychologically, emotionally resilient, being able to bounce back after struggling through a difficult or stressful time. And it also includes the ability to move forward, to grow and develop. I would have to say that our population right now is becoming very good at being resilient. If you look at what's happening with the pandemic and you watch the newscast and you read the posts on social media, you're seeing a lot of people turn a bad situation into something positive. So we are becoming a more resilient population because we're having to spring back repeatedly through a difficult and a stressful time. And hopefully we can move forward, grow, and develop from this. And at the other end, we're going to be stronger. In the world of sport, it's an easy example to come up with, and how so many athletes we've seen over the years really struggle with a situation. They've become very mentally resilient, and then they thrive. And at the other end of it, they become a stronger person, but they also potentially could become a stronger athlete. And you can probably think of a lot of athletes in sports culture that have bounced back, that have really thrived in the face of an adverse situation. This slide, you've probably seen this image because it's in so many of our courses, and the Canadian Armed Forces puts a lot of emphasis on the mental health continuum. So that's what you're looking at right now, and it really is conceptualizing our mental health from green to red. And I just draw your attention, for the purpose of today's presentation, I draw your attention to the orange and the red. The two words at the very top of those lists as we get into those stages or phases of the mental health continuum are all about anger or angry outbursts. So now think of somebody you might know who's angry all the time. It might be safe to say that they have a mental health injury or they have a stress injury. So recognizing that the anger word is also a symptom of somebody who might be struggling. So that's poignant for us to just be reminded of, that although we've seen the mental health continuum model in so many different facets of our work, the reality is it's notable now to just be reminded of, because it is applicable to what we're talking about. So this next slide you've probably also seen. It's the three-stage process of stress. And I think this one is probably one of the most important ones. If you're a visual thinker or learner, this one is good because it breaks it down into three things. An event takes place. Some external event has occurred. We have a mental filter, and now we have the ability to interpret, judge based on our experience, our ability, our skills, our resources, to either go to the red and suffer a mental health injury, so we're not going to manage the stress, we're going to probably respond in anger, or we're going to use all the tools and resources available to us, and we're going to stay in the green, or maybe green-yellow, but we're going to work to manage the stress. So when we're not able to manage a stressful situation or an event that's taken place, that's where anger becomes of concern. So this is really now taking a look at, before we even get to the red, yellow, orange, green, as the slide depicts, let's pay some attention to the mental filter. And let's take a look at how we interpret a situation, or judging that situation. That's where we have control. We do not have control over a lot of the events that take place, but we do have control over how we're going to think and behave as a result of that situation. So take, for example, COVID-19. We had no control over that. We do, however, let's pay attention to where we do have control. We do, however, have control over how we're going to mentally filter that, what we're going to think about it. We're going to draw on our experiences. We're going to interpret what this means for us. We're going to, yes, judge it, but we are going to use all of our tools and resources to work to manage it so that it doesn't take us down. And by down, I mean move us to the mental health continuum model, maybe pose a risk to our immune system or our relationships or the way that we are effective, recognizing how poignant the three-stage process of stress is as a result of this concept of anger. Next slide just reminds us that when we are in a stressful response situation, we activate this fight, flight, freeze. And an adrenaline surge occurs, all other stress hormones are engaged, and we have this increased sense of power, and our empathy for others, our vulnerable feelings rapidly diminish. So the fight, flight, freeze response, it happens to protect ourselves, but certainly recognizing how it could pose a problem if we're not able to respond with something other than a stress response. The next slide is what we call a thinking skills model. So if you can visual the three-stage stress response right now: event, mental filter, and then how we respond. This now takes a look at the situation, the event, what we're thinking about it, the physical sensations that we allow to occur, the emotions that we allow to occur, and then how we're going to behave with it. So this just expands that three-stage process of the stress model into applying some thinking. And this will be really key because as we recognize that anger is a natural state, we now, with our thoughts, can work to control our behavior. And so this is just with a lot more detail. This next slide, it talks about the situation, what was observed, facts versus your interpretation, the thoughts that have occurred, and we're going to talk about the difference between coping thoughts and trigger thoughts. The cues in your physical sensations, so maybe you feel sick to your stomach, maybe you start to sweat, some neck tension, maybe your face goes totally red, you clench all your muscles. Number 4, emotions, you might go through some feelings such as anger, fear, happiness, sadness. And then the last one, again, the 3-stage process is now in 5 stages, what you choose to do. So we've applied some thoughts, physical sensations, and emotions in that mental filter piece. And that will be really important while we work to get to the behavior with the happy face, as the slide depicts. So what we choose to do, which we hope is the best case scenario. So this next slide just reminds us that holding on to anger, it's like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at somebody, but you, in fact, are the one that gets burned. You're holding on to this anger, holding on to it, getting ready to throw it, spew it, project it to someone else, but in fact, the very nature of holding on to it means it's going to hurt you. So just another visual on the depiction of recognizing the harm of hanging on to anger. So this next slide is a list of ways to cope. So we want to take some time before you deal with an angry situation. You want to be able to talk to someone who you're not angry with about a situation. Maybe like most people, your stress management go-to is physical activity or exercise. So we know that we've had to get very creative with what that looks like. We're doing a lot of stay-at-home type workouts, body weight workouts, using what we have, maybe going for walks in our neighborhood, but we're certainly not accessing gyms like we used to. So we're being very creative, but we're recognizing how important that is. Some people will walk away from a situation. They may distract themselves. They could practice humor and laughing, so making sure that they focus on very positive, uplifting things. This might be a time that people start meditating or using relaxation skills. The counting method, which is really just a switch perspective grounding technique. And then we also encourage people to look at ways to cope with their anger by journaling it. So what a great opportunity to start writing things down, to acknowledge how you're feeling, but to place it somewhere that it's not going to continue to cause you harm. You're sort of giving it up by writing it down with that acknowledgement piece. So another tool in the industry of stress management is to take a look at what you're dealing with from a stressful situation. I think of a conference that I attended once, and I was sitting at a table with another colleague, and we were asked by the facilitator to write down all the things in our lives that were causing us some emotion, stress, anger, whatever that looked like. So take out a piece of paper, they said, and write down all the things that are stressing you out. And I would encourage you to do something similar. And so we were given about 5 or 10 minutes to start writing things down. And as I got to probably over 20 items, I thought, oh great, exercise. I'm gonna do my best on this, and I'm gonna write down absolutely everything that is causing me some stress currently. Well, I looked to the lady at my table, and although my list was 20 plus, her list was about 3. So now my number 21 was that the lady next to me didn't have as much stress as I did. But realistically, We were then challenged by the facilitator to take a look at our list and now weigh 3 words: important, control, and action. And if the stressors on our page were not important, we had no control over them, and we were not able to do anything about them, we were to cross them off. And the great news for so many of us in the room, not just the one table, but for so many people in the room that day, they just started crossing things off their list because they recognized that so much of what we do stress about, what we do become frustrated about, what we do become angry as a result of, are things that we do not have any control over. And in some cases, they might even be things that are really important to us, but we can't action them. We can't do anything about them. We can't control them. So in fact, we get to cross them off our list. Now, that might sound easier said than done. There will be situations that are very important to us, and we still want to be able to do something in that situation to control how we feel. But now that's about controlling our thoughts and controlling the things around that situation that we have control over. So, for example, you have a loved one that has just received a diagnosis of some health concern. That's very important to you. You don't have any control over it. However, you do have control over how you think and the things about that situation that you could action that may make you feel better. Really important, but you don't have control over what's just taken place. Look now to the things that you do have control over within that example, within that situation. So emphasis on control and important. And if we don't have control, and in the grand scheme of things, if it's not actually that important, so for example, back to that list, one of the things on my list, if you took a look at realistically, would be considered not important. So right away, I was kind of feeling like, embarrassed that I had something on my list that in fact, in the grand scheme of life, was not that relevant. The good news is it came off my list. So a stress anger management tool, just taking a moment to write down the things that are causing you some stress and now weigh it against those 3 words. And hopefully your list will be smaller, but hopefully your list will be things that are important to you, that you can control, and that's where you place your energy. So I referenced this already, that when we have things that trigger us, so when you looked at anger mountain as an example, it's really important as a combat to that we have, in fact, coping thoughts. So there might be things that trigger you. For example, somebody ignores you. There's a bunch of examples on this slide. And these things will create a reactive response to stressful situations. I'm sick of having to tell him over and over to turn off the TV. There would be a trigger thought example. Or he or she disrespected me. Or I am so worried about COVID-19. And the minute you say or feel these things, you are going to have a reactive response, which will probably escalate your emotional state, your physical sensation, and your action. So what we want to do is know what our trigger thoughts are. So for example, the one on there about telling him to turn off the TV, that's a very real one. Years ago, I remember thinking, I need to work on this one. It'd be Saturday morning, the Premier Soccer League in Europe would be on TV, and I would, say to my husband, please, can you turn off the TV? And it would get me upset because I would want to have a conversation. My coping thought would be, oh my gosh, it's Saturday morning. Of course he wants to watch the soccer. Don't place emphasis there. Be more realistic and have a coping thought that doesn't let you get stressed. So that would be a personal example. Think of perhaps one that is your trigger thought. And certainly we can all probably relate with the last example, that we're all so very worried about COVID-19, but that worry and that rumination isn't considered a trigger. So our coping thoughts, he may not have heard me, or he could have become distracted. He's not doing this purposely to ignore me. He's just a kid. He enjoys watching TV so much that it is hard for him to listen. So that would be a little bit like my Saturday soccer morning example. I need to be calm about COVID-19, listen to the governing bodies, do my part to protect myself and my network. So recognizing that when these trigger thoughts occur, make sure you have very close by these concepts of coping thoughts, because they'll help you. So a stressor takes place and you have a coping thought, you have a problem-solving situation. If a stressor takes place and all you have are trigger thoughts, then you have an angry situation. So this next slide reminds us that there are lots of resources available to us that would be a great opportunity for us to try or remind ourselves that they're there, and maybe there was another time in our life where we had success with coming up with what we call a relaxation response. And the CAF has come up with many examples of very useful things that we can do to get us through stressful times. And some of those are mindfulness, being more mindful. Another one is grounding techniques. Another one is positive self-talk. But probably one of the most talked about, especially recently, is abdominal breathing, meditation, the scripting that is available to us that walks us through, maybe for some people 1 or 2 minutes, maybe for others 10 or 15, and maybe in the scope of a yoga practice, maybe it's even more like 30 to 60 minutes. It doesn't matter how long, as long as it's something that is changing the response you're feeling to a situation. So this time I encourage you, there are so many apps available out there, but I encourage you to look online, and we have lots as well that we will provide following the brief. But there are so many scripts that are either muscle scan scripts, body relaxation, maybe mindfulness scripts where you actually visualize a place, a climate, and you go through the sensations that you may feel at that location. There are so many of these meditative scripts available to you. I encourage you to find one that's suitable for you. But at the very least, we ask you to either try or refresh your memory and do it again, that whole concept of abdominal breathing. Really breathing on purpose with the hopes to change the response you're having to a situation from a stress response to a relaxation response. For so many years, you've heard that terminology, just breathe, just breathe. If you're in a stressful situation, just breathe. Well, the reality is slowing down your breath immediately has a physical and physiological response to your state. So heart rate will slow down, blood pressure will slow down, muscles will relax, the stress hormones won't be generating so rapidly in your system. So recognizing that if you can try the abdominal breathing, and it's really just breathing in on purpose and exhaling about one breath every 5, 6, 7 seconds, really slowing down your breath to benefit physiologically from that response. And I would encourage, as mentioned, to try to find a meditative script or an online script, something that you read that helps you through that. You can also get them virtually. You can get them online. You can have someone read it to you. There are so many apps available out there. Avail yourself to what's available and try it for the benefit of it. Next couple slides remind us that there are lots of resources within our organization. We have SIFMAP, we have suicide hotlines, we have lots of information on COVID-19, and I recognize these are all Canada.ca websites, but certainly you can access them from where you are. We have a family information line, sexual misconduct response center, we have kids help phone, and then we do have an ARC line in support of COVID-19. So recognizing that if, let's say we're talking about a very serious stressor and one that you are having a difficult time coping with beyond the tools and resources that we've talked about today, that there are also very serious resources to help you through that. So an opportunity to remind you of what's out there. So application of knowledge. As I mentioned on the first or second slide, for many of us, this is probably a reminder of things we've already heard before. And maybe we do a bit of a Control-Alt-Delete and we start over with a new approach to what anger management looks like for you. And I encourage you to visualize on the picture, not of the fist into the flat hand, but into the other one of the person sort of having a bit of an aha moment. What can anger management look like for you? And for me, as far as points to take forward, I would suggest you are reminded to recognize that it is about you. It's not about anybody else. It's about you. It's about your health. It's about the control you have over situations. And in actual fact, managing anger can be a very constructive tool to get things done, a constructive tool to protect the people in your network, a constructive tool to be more efficient at work or home. So don't, as I'm saying, that's a negative word. Don't always look at the word anger as something negative. Let's try to look at something more positive about the concept of anger management. And that very word of management means we get to have some control in a situation that otherwise has caused us to be in an emotional state, but recognizing where do we have control here. And then this is just meant to be a reminder of humor, laughing, letting it go. The slide has a little puppy sitting on top of the head of another puppy, and it says, when angry with someone, it helps to sit down and think about the problem. So this is just for the next 7 days. You could try this tactic, and this is really just about finding humor. You know, prior to COVID-19, as an example, I didn't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I would have to say that I was probably the worst Facebook friend to have because I never went in, I never liked anything, I never commented, I never did anything. And now I find it a source for humor. And it really is, you know, it's sometimes exactly what I need to just take 5 minutes and scroll through and look at very funny posts about, you know, various different things. There's no shortage of memes and images there that are depicting a laughing side of an unfortunate situation. And this slide, as mentioned, just reminds us of that. And this is just a funny little Dear Lord from none other than Tweety Bird. I think that's who that is. I've not gossiped, lost my temper, been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or self-indulgent. I've not whined, complained, cursed, or eaten any chocolate. I've charged nothing on my credit card. But I am getting out of bed in a minute, and I think that I'll really need somebody's help then. So the recognition that sometimes the minute we start our day, things can go downhill depending on how we're feeling. So recognizing that just do those self-check-ins. Just recognize how you're feeling. Recognize your behavior in certain situations. And when we look to help, we have so many resources and tools out there. So knowing them, having them, practicing them, and using them would be the message. So key points. Don't ever expect to never feel angry. It's not realistic. I think we're all in good company right now with the month to Christmas, and everybody has a different normal than we're used to. Focus on what you think, say, and do after you feel angry. You can learn to become less reactive. And remember, as mentioned back at the beginning, nobody, no person makes you angry. Your response with anger is a personal choice. And we want to try to catch it before it escalates up the anger mountain. And that is all for me. So I thank you for participating today, for viewing our delivery for our Formation Europe project. And thank you to our organizers, to my colleague Cindy Tromp, to Amanda, to Mike Taylor, to Guy. Thank you for your support. And we look forward to delivering content every month And without anything else, I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Have a great day, and try to focus on the things that we can control. Thank you all.